we can see you, and this is the same spot you were in on Thursday, so I think this will work. We lost you for a couple of seconds here in the beginning, but I think that's fine, and the background noise is fine. So let's start this. I'm Daniel again, working with Outreach and Education at CEMUS, and Ash, you're live from Glasgow, reporting in, and we're here in CEMUS Library. And it's been a couple of days, the Global Day of Justice, that was on Saturday, and also the People Summit, I think, started on Sunday, will go on until Wednesday. And I think it's also a loss and damages day at COP, the official COP. So I think we'll do this as we've done before, that you can start with a kind of summary of the events and things you've been attending, and your thoughts and reflections. So please go ahead.
Yeah, so I've got my notes chronologically. So we'll begin with Friday, as I last saw you on Thursday. So yeah, as you said, Friday was the Youth Day. And so I didn't attend the protest on the streets because I was in the Blue Zone. And I was hoping there'd be much more of a stronger youth presence in the Blue Zone, but I was quite disappointed. So first I went to a talk at it's called the US Action Center, which sounds exciting, which was entitled Empowering Indigenous Youth. And there were 4 people on the panel, and none of them were Indigenous youth. So they had the Secretary of the Interior was there, which is obviously a big role in the US, and she's the first Indigenous woman to be at that level of office. And then they had 3 other Indigenous speakers, one from Africa, one from South America, and one from North America. But there was no strong youth presence there. They had youth came in to ask them questions. Like, so the youth had a pre-recorded question that was on a screen, and then the panel answered the questions. I just think that's not empowerment. That's keeping the same dynamic going of you're the youth, you should ask the questions, and us the Can you hear me now?
Yeah, the sound is back.
Excellent. Yeah, I think there's issues going on with the Wi-Fi, so I'm on my phone now. How much did you hear? Did I get on to talking about the UK event?
Nope.
Or did it? Okay. So the US event. Did you hear about the US event?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So then the UK had a similar event at their pavilion, which was about empowering youth solutions to climate change. And the first 20 minutes of this event, Bear Grylls was there speaking. And it just felt like a sort of photo opportunity to distract from the real issue. So Bear Grylls spoke about the importance of getting all of his young scouts to remember the 3 R's of reduce, reuse, and recycle. And I'm sitting there like, 20 companies are responsible for a third of all emissions. It's great that you've got these 8-year-olds separating their recycling, but that we can't, at this level of meeting, we can't stand here and celebrate that. And then so they had 4 different youth groups, some of them based in the UK and some of them internationally, talking about what they're doing. And 2 of the UK schools-based ones were talking about like making their own gardens so they could make their own vegetables and rewilding parts of their land. And it's good, but I think that it's quite patronizing that that's the platform that we're giving the youth. Is, oh, you've planted like a wildflower meadow in your school garden, that's great. When everyone knows the solution is so much bigger, there was no talk on that panel of youth civil disobedience. The fact that Fridays for Future has emerged over the last few years and the youth are taking to the street and striking from school, but that had no platform in this space. The only platform went to, oh, you're planting some flowers in your garden and you're helping your school to separate the recycling better. And at the end of that talk, they were sort of saying, what can we do to help empower youth more? And one of them said that, we don't just want to be tokens. We don't want to be here for a photo opportunity. We want a legitimate platform. And I happen to be sitting next to Andrea Leadsom, who is an MP in the UK, a Conservative MP who last year was paid, I think it was about £2,500 from an oil and gas company. And I said to her that, there needs to be a better solution for youth within politics. And she told me to look into the Youth Council, which does exist. It's for, I think it's 13 to 18-year-olds to get involved with in the UK. So I said, okay, thanks for the information. I took a look at it, and they meet once a year. And it's just, it's another bit of tokenism where I think, the youth that are getting involved in this are doing everything that they can within the structures. But to have people meet for once a year. I mean, it's a good thing for people to put on their CV when you're young, but you're not really affecting change by meeting once a year. I just think it was interesting how, I mean, I'm from the UK, and there's quite like a strict discipline. There isn't really an intergenerational discussion, which I've learned the past few days is really big in Indigenous communities, that they have that intergenerational platform where I know one of the speakers at one of the events said that the youth can run fastest, but the elders know the road. And I think that was quite like an interesting way of putting it, where in the UK, it was very much kind of like that we will make these structures and you can work, you know, you can go to the council once a year, or you can plant flowers, but don't do any civil disobedience. And then I saw, so there was the Youth Impact Award presentation, which went to a young woman called Shea Batista, who I'd never heard of before. So she's from an indigenous Mexican group and moved to the US when she was young. And she's one of the biggest Fridays for Future organizers. And I thought it was quite interesting how the only name you ever hear is Greta Thunberg. And whether that's just because, you know, I live in Sweden or in Europe. I mean, I think that general structural racism has a lot to do with it as well, that there's so many great youth activists from all around the world. And the only one that really gets picked up on is Greta. I mean, I don't know for certain, but I know at the last COP, there was an issue with so there was 3 white youth activists from Europe and then 1 black girl, and she was cut out of the picture. There was 4 of them in the picture, and they deliberately cut her out. And the photographer was like, oh, it was just about composition of the photo and this and that. And I think that you can see it again, that, you know, there are so many great youth activists or activists from all around the world, and the only ones that are picked up on are the white ones. And it's I mean, I don't help the demographic here, but there's a lot of white men. So I'm starting to feel a little bit guilty for my place in this conference. But yeah, it was interesting to hear this young woman speak and what she'd gone through of suffering like environmental racism, where she was from a town where the water sort of disappeared to a chemicals company, I think, polluted the water so much that she had to move, and sort of hearing about her sort of joy and love that gave her the energy. That one of the speakers who was presenting said that they'd studied lots of different NGOs and activists and asked, do you work for like love or anger? And about 85% said that they worked for anger. And this young woman said that she could work for love. And I think that's quite an interesting way to think about what drives us to work or to become active in these kind of spaces. Is it an anger at the system, or is it a love and a hope that can make it better? I don't know which one's better. But yeah, that was my notes from the youth day. Does anyone have any questions on the youth day or my anger at the youth day? Because it wasn't very good.
Yeah, I have a question about the youth day, sure. I was wondering about, because I watched a seminar, I don't know if it was on that day, but it was about green jobs and how it's so difficult for youth today to get into the job market. And now with this revelation that we're turning toward more green jobs, how can youth and young people get more active and be involved in that sort of transition? Was that ever spoken about?
Not particularly at the events I was at, but I mean, there's thousands of events happening a day. So, you know, it's there's a decent chance that I just missed it, and the events that I attended weren't representative of what else went on. I'd say from it, I think that, I mean, for myself and a young woman I met yesterday in the protest that I'll talk about, that you get this education which teaches you that the system is flawed, and as long as we continue to work within this system, we'll never generate real change, and then you leave. And I mean, I also work with a business consultancy, getting paid to tell companies how they can improve their practices. If you to go and get green jobs, so that's solar panels, electric cars, renewable energy, and like all of these things also have a footprint. You know, you're not working for the oil and gas company, but you're probably still going to be using a lot of rare earth minerals. You're going to be destroying the environment to some extent. You're going to be working for a company that has growth as its main objective and return for shareholders. I think that there's a big, I mean, for me, I feel a bit of an internal conflict of knowing like where to go with that. And I was speaking to someone from the CCL before COP and said that you can kind of work in academia or for a research institute, or you work for the man. And it's sort of like, as soon as you try and become like, you make active change, then, you know, there's activism and there's some civil society organizations, but there isn't that much paid work within that. You know, it's very difficult to earn a living as an activist. And I think that, you know, I hope that with youth, you know, I think that the entrepreneurship that we'll start seeing, or the businesses that are being created, become more like organizations with a greater shift towards social enterprises, where, you know, the purpose of the business isn't simply to make money, but it's to provide some form of public good or necessity. But I mean, I think it's that whether that comes quick enough is a different question. That, you know, we need to be getting those changes now, and the youth, you know, that we're in spaces, but we're going to struggle to set up our own organization when you're fresh out of uni. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It's good to hear your thoughts on this, because I think it's important that we consider these aspects also in what we do. And like you were saying, that maybe in the future there won't be just working for money, there will be other aspects of work that will be equally important, that we the employees can actually put pressure. The future employees, the youth, they can actually put pressure on the employers and the different organizations and workplaces to actually have some social responsibilities.
Yeah, I saw that with the statistics. So it's like I saw a statistic, it's like a majority of workers will soon be millennials. So and with that, there's a kind of ideological shift, and that there's apparently becoming an issue with the kind of brain drain in certain industries, that younger people aren't as driven by money as they previously were. And when you're aware of all of the social environmental crises going on around you, to go and put a great brain to work for Goldman Sachs or a bank or whatever, when you could go and do that, you know, even if you're trained in economics, to go for ethical investing, which is, you know, there's still obviously lots of gray areas around it and whether it's actually doing good or not. But yeah, I think that definitely that young people want more than just a paycheck now, that they want to know that the hours that they're putting in every week are making some kind of positive social change. And I guess companies are responding to that, or they have to, if they're going to keep employing younger people and keep business going.
And I just think that's fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the change always comes from the bottom. And if you know the majority of the people working for your company want a certain thing to happen, then you're either going to steer that way or your company's going to fail. You can't have a majority of people within an organization whose core belief differs from the organization. And it's interesting, it kind of links to what, so when I was at the protest on Saturday, I met a young woman who was in a, you know, also worked for a consultancy. And I was sort of reflecting on it afterwards, that we both thought that we kind of like sell out in this business world. And I was thinking about how powerful I felt as part of the protest, but then I felt powerful in the protest because I was surrounded by like 100,000 people. I wasn't powerful, we were powerful as a collective. And I think that's the power of protest, and that I've never felt that way, and I've never been to a protest so big before. But then it's kind of where do I have power as an individual and as a collective? And that as an individual, I have power over some pretty, or not power, but influence over some pretty large companies in Scandinavia, and with this network that I work with, which is growing to the world. Now, that influence I have is within a system that's problematic to me, but I have that influence as an individual. Whereas, you know, if I'm just by myself, if I was a one-man protest at the weekend, no, nothing would have happened. But when you're so many, and I think that maybe it would be better to, I think it's a thing that I'm going to start trying to do more consciously, is to not be binary of, are you an activist or are you a corporate solutions kind of person, that I think that society always tries to like put you in a pigeonhole and say, oh, you're this thing or you're that thing, where in fact, I mean, I'm not an activist by myself, but if I've got 50,000 people around me, then I can make change. If I'm stood by myself, then, you know, you can't have 50,000 people shouting and drumming in a business meeting, but I can use the energy that I've got from that group and take it into that meeting and try and sort of affect change in that way.
Yeah, that's really, I mean, it used to be that you could be a citizen and engage in different things as a citizen, but then you're also engaged as a professional in your profession. And those two areas of engagement could be very different. So I think that's important as well. I was thinking also that when talking about youth, and it's usually, I mean, it's youth that is younger than university level. You go to college or university, so I think that's also a challenge for universities in what kind of education youth that have been very active within these movements and might continue to be very active, but also a challenge for CEMUS in how we are organizing our courses, the roles between students and course coordinators, the themes and topics, and how mainstream and non-mainstream CEMUS courses are, to use a sloppy kind of divide, but still, it would be, and there's so many people engaged on Twitter within different of these movements and in different continents. So it would be interesting if we could maybe organize some kind of follow-up to COP, or try to connect with some of these people to get a sense also as well, and how they see the role of universities, but also education within all of this.
Yeah, I met two young women last week who've agreed to an interview with me. They've gone home this week, so we're going to do it on Zoom. But they were both in their first or second year studying in the UK. And they were just like, we didn't know what COP was. We had no idea. And then they got these delegation passes. And then I think that they said that they had a couple of hundred applications, but she was like, this went out to over 15,000 people. If people knew what COP was, there should have been loads of applications. And I mean, for me at university, that I wasn't taught anything about the applied instance. So nothing really about COP, as in this COP I'm at now for the climate, or COP15 for biodiversity that's going on at the moment. And I think a lot of education fails in the application of the knowledge, that it focuses on perpetuating itself as a research institute and not enough about how do we prepare people for jobs. Maybe as you were saying before, Adam, like how can we prepare young people for the jobs in this green market? That so much in education at universities prepares you to become a researcher, even when the majority of people don't become researchers. But it's kind of like it's the only tool that the university has. We assess your knowledge in the end with a thesis, where you've done your own research. But in reality, I mean, you would work, maybe a group thesis would be a better idea, that you collaborate as a group and you do a project, as opposed to just this independent analytical idea where you spend hours writing this paper and then it's just kind of disposed of at the end.
Yeah, I just want to say that I know that for the bachelor's in if you do engineering for your bachelor thesis level in civil engineering, you do it as a group project. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out to those that don't know.
And we have högskolor and yrkeshögskolor in Sweden also for
Trade school and
but still it's interesting.
Okay, but let's continue with your list, Ash, or day by day.
Yeah, and then so Friday afternoon, one of the last things I saw was in the plenary room. So I was in the big room, and the closing speech was from Alex Sharma, who's the UK head of COP this year, and he was really framing things like it's not a question. So his hope was it's not a question if we get there or not. It's a question of if we get there fast enough. And so but the problem is that because of tipping points, it's not like you're late to the dinner, but it's still on the table. It's like, if we're too late and to the point where we've already got to 2 degrees warming mid-century, then it is too late. It's not that, we'll reach it eventually. If the polar ice caps are now emitting so much methane and not reflecting any of the heat, that's not a small thing. And I think that it's this idea, I think, that comes from politicians and big businesses who don't want to rock the boat too much, that this small incremental change is still change and it's still in the right direction. And that, but then, in reality, the success of this is binary. And we either will, not of COP, I think, that's saying that an individual COP that has succeeded or failed isn't that pragmatic. But if we say fail or succeed with the climate crisis, that is binary. And I mean, I guess it depends on who you ask, but there'll be already people today who had to relocate from the place that their families lived for generations. For them, we've already failed. There are places now who are struggling with proper failure, who are struggling with resource accessibility. We're almost failing for them. I mean, thankfully, living in Europe, in a relatively wealthy country, it hasn't yet failed. We haven't yet failed on the climate crisis if you live in Europe. But if you live in sub-Saharan Africa, it almost has. And I think that this sort of lack of urgency by literally the chair of the whole meeting to say, oh well, we'll definitely get there, we just don't know it in time. And I saw an interview, it was on Twitter, with Kevin Anderson, who he said that there's a 95% chance, I think his phrase is, we'll go to hell in a handcart, but there's a 5% chance we won't. And he said that that's not random chance, that's a choice, that is a deliberate choice of, are we going to pursue that difficult option that means that we will certainly get that 5%, or are we just going to say, oh well, we'll try and aim towards that upper margin, but we don't know. And I think it's sort of looking like the ambition for most major emitting nations is the more lax option of, oh well, we'll try. And it's not a question of what will it take to get us to 1.5. People are phrasing the question as, oh, what can we do to try and improve? And that incremental improvement is irrelevant. Already for some people, within the next decade for more people, and by the end of 2050, by the end of the century, that incrementalism is going to have meant nothing. Any questions on the incremental grant?
No, but I think it's, for me, it's very much a divide also by everything that is done in the right direction means something, in that it has a real effect in, if it is you can quantify it or you can make it in a more general argument. But I think it matters, but it's also really hard in that sense. For example, the aviation, Nordic aviation thing that I listened to this morning, they work in aviation, they're trying to change how aviation works and airports and electric and biofuels. But still, is it enough? Is it fast enough? Probably not. But they're still trying in a sense. So yeah, but it depends on the mood of the day as well.
But as long as we have exponential growth, it doesn't really matter if they try. We'll never catch up.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting way, in that the way that a lot of companies measure their greenhouse gas emissions, that they have what's called I've forgotten the word of it. What's called and then he forgets the word. Intensity. It's an intensity-based target. So companies can say, right, we will reduce by, that we're going to halve our emissions by 2030 or whatever. But then that halving of emissions can be intensity-based. So that can be half per product that they sell, per turnover, per profit. And that by doing so, you could achieve those targets. But if you've halved your emissions by the end of the decade, but you've doubled your market and the amount of output you have, your emissions have remained the same. And I think it's the issues with the creative accounting that's done, that I know with particularly with Article 6, that they began last week to look into this. I'm imagining they haven't got particularly far. I've not heard anything concrete about it. But that incremental change is the same with energy usage, that we talk about, that there's more renewables are going onto the grid, which is great, but it's not a replacement, it's an addition. The amount of energy that we're getting from fossil fuel power plants isn't reducing as more renewables are going on. It's the same with efficiency, and the idea that, oh well, things will become more efficient and we'll decouple. And that things have got more efficient and we've had more. Like an economist from the early 1900s, it might have been Adam Smith, but I'm not one up on my economists, predicted that by the sort of 2025 we'll be working a day a week, because everything will be so efficient that there'll be no need. And yet here we are working 40-hour weeks with more things, not really any happier than we were before, but with a big pile of trash, all of the damage that we're doing to the environment. And I think that's the sort of problematic issues, that if it's, as you said, Marlon, if it's still based in growth, then you can reduce your emissions per product. But if you're selling more products, you've not done anything.
Yeah, and I think it's a way of language as well, because the aviation discussion was they're aiming for being fossil free by 2050, and that's still far off. But what they mean then is that they won't use that kind of fuel in the airplanes. So they're not talking about the production line, all the infrastructure behind all of this, or growth or consumption around it. So it becomes much more easier to talk about that kind of goal. But when we talk about it, I think we can say we here in the room or in general at CEMUS, it becomes more of you want to do a full analysis of all the inputs, outputs, and everything, and minerals and whatever you have. So that also, but it's the same with net zero in that you have some kind of future technology that will permit you to emit roughly the same or a bit less maybe. So there is this other option that can kind of open up that avenue.
Yeah, I spoke to someone on, I don't know, Saturday night it was. It was interesting. So I went to a protest during the day, but then for my other job, I'd been invited to a cocktail party. So I had my smart stuff on underneath, and then I arrived at this fancy hotel and had to go to the bathroom and get changed into my more suitable attire. But I was speaking to this woman, and she was saying that, the emissions reductions are so context specific that, if you work in an office, say, and you offer services, so like a university, for example, if you were to reduce, then, that's about changing your food providers, your energy providers, your investments, and all things that you have quite a lot of control over. If you are an aviation company, a steel company, a concrete company, and you're going to reduce your emissions by half by the end of the decade, and then net zero by 2050, that's actually a huge undertaking from the way the industry is today. So I think that it's, and then when you brought up the aviation industry, so a problem with aviation is that they're sort of at the moment, in some instances, transitioning from fossil fuels to biofuels. And if you're then deforesting areas to burn that for fuel instead of the coal that's under the ground, I mean, it's not as carbon intensive, but the land use degradation that comes from that is significant. And I think that hydrogen could be applied to aviation, that there is some instances where hydrogen makes the most sense. So as for aviation, for example, for shipping. But then how you produce that hydrogen is again the issue. That I've seen some instances here of green hydrogen, which is, hydrogen that's produced with renewables. And that's great, but it's all about the production lines. Just because greenhouse gas emissions aren't coming out of the tailpipe doesn't mean they're not baked into the system. And unless you can get it out of the system as a whole, then you're not, it's incremental. Again, that you're making progress, and that's great. But if we don't make it in time, then it's not good enough.
All right. Did you have more things on your agenda that you've been attending?
No more that I've been attending. I've got some photos and videos from the protest that I could share. I've never done a screen share on my phone, so I'm not sure how this is going to go. Only the host can do screen sharing.
It's probably a locked thing here. Let me check.
But then let's ask you a little bit more maybe about the Youth Day that you were on.
Yeah.
That were sort of the big happening on Friday there. So you said you were not surprised by how many. There were very few youth at the actual COP event. Is that because of the way they have organized it? Is it still problems with the tickets and the COVID situation over there, or why are there so few attending the Green Zone?
So the Green Zone is an issue of the ticketing. So you don't need a pass to get this. Anyone can go to the Green Zone. But unless you're British or local to Glasgow where it's happening, you can't really afford to come. Number one, unless you live locally. The ticketing system was, so you could book a maximum of 3 days, or for certain events. And that meant that you couldn't book afterwards, but also that the event wasn't full. The venues weren't full when I was there. There was plenty of more space. And I think for youth into the blue zone this time, COVID is an obvious restriction. Financing that because of the idea that youth aren't actually doing anything. Do you know what I mean? That there's nothing productive coming from youth, I think is a very pessimistic, but not unreal, not it's an idea that I disagree with, but I think that the idea is held by many people that, oh, well, there's no point, if you can send someone who's a 50-year-old business expert or an 18-year-old youth activist, which one should you send? And, like 9 times out of 10, this 45-year-old business expert's going to win. So yeah, and I think that, the application of, how do you apply to come to one of these events? And I mean, thankfully, I didn't have to do it. It was all done by SLU for me. But youth can't overcome those barriers. And then if you're coming from a foreign country outside, or I mean, anywhere now, after Brexit, but you have to sort out visas, you have to sort out passports, you have to sort out all these things, and I think all of the barriers that are there particularly affect poor communities and nations, indigenous groups, and the youth, because all 3 of those just don't have access to the economic and the cultural capital that you would need to overcome those barriers.
Yeah,
and then even if you do get in, then do you get a platform? That I mean, it was Youth Day, and there was no youth sitting on the panel that was about empowering youth. So there were so many hurdles to get in the door. And then when you get in the door, you have to know the people who are organizing the events, and you have to get them to agree to give you that hour on that stage instead of the business people or the politicians or whatever. And I think that sell is kind of difficult for young people.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how, and it's a very different deal, but how they organize the 50-year anniversary of the Stockholm Environmental Conference next year as well in June. It's also 30 years since Rio, but yeah, and it's not a COP meeting, but they will still have this celebrity kind of politicians attending to some kind of main event, but then what kind of side events, and how will they include the public and other actors basically. And they should be in the final stages of organizing that now, so but I haven't heard anything. Okay, I think you can share your screen now if you wanted to do that, if it works on your phone. Otherwise I can add them also in editing, but
I think I select
on one of the times. How will I know where my name is? Is there going to be a video editing?
I don't really know how this works in this instance, but I'll just click. Can you see that now? And I can just describe to you what's going on in the picture. So yeah, this is the I don't know what they're called. The people dressed in red who are normally at Extinction Rebellion protests. And at the end of the protest, when we'd walked around here, they all were sitting around eating some food at the end of the event. And I just thought it was such a funny picture that normally you see them in such in character as actors, playing out this role. And then at the end of the event, they were all sitting around in a circle, kind of eating some veggie stew or whatever was given out. So I just thought that was quite funny. This is this is at the park at the end of the event, and this guy was doing a nice oil painting of the fields. It was quite strange actually in the event that there was. I mean, they've estimated there was around 100,000 people there, and then we went all the way through and got to the end, and there was no. I was expecting a big stage and speakers and a kind of reception, but it wasn't there. I looked a bit apocalyptic almost, that the sun was kind of setting behind the clouds in a hazy way, and there were just sort of a few people knocking down with signs. I'll see if I can find pictures for that. I had to share them in a kind of weird way on my phone. This is a good group of people at the protest. So they're the climate criminals. So we've got Bolsonaro, Scott Morrison, Trump, Putin, Rupert Murdoch. I mean, there's a lot of really good art, good creative artistry that's gone into some of the banners, the big, I don't know what you call them, just props, I guess, to go down the road with, that were really cool. This was interesting. So this was what did they call it? I think it was Doctors Rebellion. So it's an Extinction Rebellion group who are all doctors or trained medical professionals. And when it got to this part, which is called Hope Street, they all sort of led down and did a die-in, as I think it's called. And so, yeah, they were basically highlighting the issues that come from climate change or general air pollution, and the impacts on human health. So it had the one just to the right, which is cut out of this picture, said that 7 million people a year die of air pollution. And I mean, I think that that's quite a conservative estimate, depending on which source you look at. They all have varying amounts, but it's a lot. And often that, that we really measure CO2. And that COP26 is the kind of the famous COP, but I didn't even know until earlier this year that there's actually COP15 going on as well, which is biodiversity COP. But then we don't yet have an IPCC level body that is talking about air pollution, which we need to talk about. And in this, I think you can extend that to all of the planetary boundaries, that we need to have more, not just research, but interconnected research that can get a planetary consensus on these issues. And we don't have that for air pollution. And it was quite powerful, I think, especially seeing medical professionals do it in the same way that I said last week, that it kind of moved me a lot more to hear Indigenous people talking about how it's affecting them. It's so much more moving than seeing it, just sort of reading it from a textbook or hearing about it from your lecturer in Europe. So yeah, I think seeing the medical professionals stage this was really interesting. Then this is the size of the protest. I mean, that's not even a tenth of it, but we went right the way down. Yeah, I mean, I did have a. I can't play them if they're on videos, but I'll upload them into the Google Drive, and then you can access them and maybe do something with them, or on my Twitter as well. There's those. Yeah, this is the other way of that hill. So this one was going down to this building at the bottom, and then that's back up the hill, and that went on for a long time. And we were maybe, we weren't anywhere near either of the ends. But yeah, that's some pictures. I don't think I can share the video. So this one is supposed to be a video, but I can't click play on it.
I'll share them to the editing. So
yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'll stop the share there. That's some pictures. But yeah, the event was huge, and not at all. There was a very limited police presence. Where in the event I was speaking about that happened last week, which was with Indigenous groups, and it was so militarized. But there's no, like this one, you didn't really see any police around. There was lots of bands. There was a brass band. There was like a drumming band. There was, just a generally really good energy throughout the whole thing. A lot of focus on Indigenous people, people of color, and they were all moved to the front of the protest. And it was very self-organized, that in the bits at the start where people were trying to plan where to go. I mean, I'd never thought of how much admin and prep there is to an event of that size. But it all seemed to be very much self-organized, that people were organizing between each other to get different groups to where they needed to be. There was just a wonderful atmosphere. People of all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of ages, were all together for the same purpose. So it felt really empowering, like I said before. How much difference can come out of one individual protest, I think is it may be impossible to measure. But I think that to be a world leader and to sit there on the Saturday afternoon, and maybe you'll be sitting in your nice hotel and eating your nice food, but you look out the window and you see that whole street is closed because 100,000 people who you represent are telling you telling you which way they want you to go. Then I think it's, especially in a context like COP, that if you arrive to the building you're going to negotiate in, and you go past all of that anger and all of that energy, then it must have some kind of rub-off effect on you as a negotiator or politician.
Okay, we should wrap up. Did you have a comment or?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I think that's something you will have to look out for then this week, if you can find any sign of that rub-off effect from this weekend's protests in the negotiations now that are going to happen.
Yeah, we'll see how they go. I mean, so normally for the negotiations, they're not open to the public. They're just kind of like quite small teams of national negotiators that do it. But it would be interesting. I don't know if anyone with more sort of power and connections than me can get those interviews with negotiators or with high-ranking businesses to sort of say, oh, when you look at the news and you see that anger from the public, or that energy, or that passion, how does it affect you when you make decisions, if it's in the boardroom or the negotiating rooms here, or any decisions that you make?
Yeah, it would be interesting if we could find the Swedish chief negotiator. I can't remember his name, but to get a comment or something that we could also include on Friday's lunch report. So I can see if I can reach him on Twitter or somewhere. That might be interesting to do as well. So what is happening now? We meet again on Wednesday, 12:15. But what is on your agenda, and what is happening in Glasgow?
So today's loss and damages day. So I spoke with a member of the youth Danish delegation, and she's sort of covering loss and damages quite closely. And she was just saying that there just hasn't really been the space provided for people to feel comfortable enough to speak about this. That the people who are really suffering the loss and really suffering the damage, it's an incredibly raw and emotional thing to speak about. And then I think to speak about it in an environment as clinical as COP and as large, that, if I was to be invited to sit on a stage and say about how everything that my culture has ever been about is disappearing because of the global north and people who know what they're doing and don't care. So I think there's a difficulty for people suffering to communicate, because they're it's obviously incredibly difficult. And then also from the global north side, that it's a Pandora's box, that once you open that box and you say, you make the apology, which is well due, to say, we are sorry for what our colonizing nations have done to the rest of the world with resource extraction, CO2 pollution. Then, if you make that apology, then there deserves to be a reparation. And there is no limit to that reparation, in time, in money, in any kind of asset, that it is a limitless debt that is owed. And I think that's probably where some of the resistance comes from, that once you open the Pandora's box, like, you can't just put the lid back on it. And that's maybe why some of the countries in the global north, when they negotiate these issues, aren't willing to accept as much as they should.
Okay, we should wrap up. Thanks to everybody that joined here in CEMUS Library. Thank you to Ash, and I'll try to find some of the videos from Saturday to add to this video as well. And we connect again on Wednesday, 12:15. We'll have one guest who he used to work in a bank, and he knows some aspects of finance at least. So he'll be joining us on Wednesday as well. Yeah. So best of luck with everything, and I'll turn off the recording. Thank you, Ash.
Thank you.